Should you leave your kids some real estate? I think that's a really important question to ask. Sure, I'm in my mid 30s and I don't have any children yet, but this is actually an important question that I believe all real estate investors should ask. Now, before we jump into it, I think it's important to tackle this concept of generational wealth. You see, a lot of people throw around this buzzword of generational wealth as basically, um, if you buy this piece of real estate, think about it. Your children's children's children are going to own it. But the likelihood, are they really? And let's talk about why they don't usually. So, normally, most assets don't pass down through multiple generations. So, like, maybe they might go to your children, but the question is if they'll go to your children's children, basically more than one generation. Most of the time, these assets don't pass through multiple because of the lack of. One of the things is I see that it usually doesn't continue to get passed down because there's a lack of education and a lack of a skill set. So basically, they're receiving this, but they don't know how to further it. The other part is now this is something where it's like the trust fund baby thing. It's a lot of times it can be squandered because it wasn't earned. And so because it wasn't earned, it's hard to either maintain it or to grow it. Another part is, and this is track with me here. I believe generational wealth doesn't often last through generations because there's not generational direction. And that goes back to the improper, education and the skill sets, right? Also, I see that it doesn't pass down through multiple generations is because a lack of proper estate planning, where it just actually there's issues with that, and lastly, one of the issues I see is where generational wealth doesn't pass through to the next generation or to the generation after that, is because of betting on the wrong torch carriers. What does that mean? It's who do you set up, or do you set anyone up at all to kind of, are there too many Indians, not enough chiefs? And it's kind of one of those things where, you know, is there leadership through the family, through the generations? And so those are some of the things that I've seen. Um, Now, a lot of people, again, they get this idea that they want to set their children up, and I love that. I think that that's noble. But one of the biggest issues is that it all comes down to, number one, do you have children? Right? That is actually becoming less common, right? In the newer generations, right? You've got the dinks, double income, no kids. You've got a lower birth rate, all of those things, right? So this will be interesting thinking about future generations, right? But ultimately, when you think about leaving real estate to your kids, what's your intent? Are you wanting to leave them money? Now, is that in the form of a lump sum or an income stream? Or are you wanting to leave them a business? I, it's been a while, but I want to say somewhere I read that it's like 95% of businesses don't actually have an exit plan. So think laundromat, think I'm thinking dry cleaner because I'm looking at that right here, but like a mechanic shop or whatever that may be. Most of the time those businesses shut down because they don't actually have a successor, right? Someone who will adequately um be the proper, person to carry it on, the torch carrier, right? And so most businesses, it actually ends when the founder dies. Very rarely do businesses get, properly taken over by their kids and then carried on for a long time to where their kids take it on, right? Like that's not as common. So keep that part in mind. And a lot of times, most people's children are not properly trained to take it over either. There's not any proper direction. So going back to the generational thing, right? There's not a lot of proper direction, especially not generational direction. And then on top of that, it's not there's the proper education and the proper skill sets are not passed along either. And so when someone says, I want to leave my kids real estate, well, especially if it's a portfolio of rentals, that very much is a business, right? You generally have a team you have to manage, right? Whether it's you managing it yourself or managing managers, you've got handymen. Are you doing the accounting yourself? Do you have an accountant? All of those things. So it's important to understand, treat it like a business. Who's going to take over the business? One of the biggest question is, who are your kids, right? Who are your heirs? Now, if you don't have them, you can always look at things like charity, stuff like that. But the other part of that is, do your kids even want to be a part of the family business? Um, some people's kids, and I very much have come across this, their kids don't want anything to do with the family business. Um, so then the question becomes, are you leaving them a burden? And I think that's important to understand. I think a lot of people get this lofty novelty idea where it's like it sounds good in their head to leave their kids properties, but how many people's kids inherit properties that then become burdens? How do I know? Because I've bought it from them. I've bought numbers of properties from people who've inherited them, and it's been a burden and not a blessing. So with that being said, I mean, I'm under contract with one now that they inherited this property and it's been nothing but a nightmare. The siblings are fighting, so there's divisiveness among the siblings. There wasn't a proper a ton of proper estate planning, and it's more than anything a burden rather than a blessing. I've seen the thing, and that's not even a rental. I've seen it also with rentals that people have left, with I mean, so I knew someone called me, a woman called me. She said her and her husband inherited 60 properties from her in-laws, and which sounds like a significant size of business, right? Like, hey, basically they could have, on that, they could potentially have quit their job on that and just managed this property. But they had such a bad experience with one of the properties, just a nightmare tenant, that they wanted to liquidate every other property because they were not prepared for the business. They were not prepared to take it over. And so then again, sounds great, but it ended up being more of a burden than a blessing. So think through that. Do your children, would they have interest in it? And so I love when I see people involve their children and their family into the business. So because ultimately you're introducing them to these things and saying, hey, it might be something that over time you can build them into the future of the business. Um, Look, I don't care what you want. If you don't have proper estate planning, no one's going to be able to execute what you want properly after you're gone. So make sure, absolutely get a will done at minimum. There's higher advanced levels of estate planning, but please, I'm in the middle of updating my will right now, and so those things are so important. I don't care what you want. If you do not have it planned out with a will properly done, it's not going to get happen. It's not going to happen. Um, and then, lastly, don't be selfish. Like, don't be selfish in the sense of, well, I like the idea of leaving this to my kids, but if they have no interest in it, well, then maybe you could leave them instructions that when you die, sell them. Or maybe you set it up to where, and we've had this happen where some people set it up where they sell to us on seller financing so that when they pass, their kids are getting a monthly payment every month rather than the burden of, properties that they have to upkeep, with repairs, management, or even managing managers, right? All of those things. And well, one more thought here. I had a coach one time in the business space that he said, my kids know they're not getting anything from my estate. We help them get their first house, um, help them get through school and their first house, but they're not inheriting anything. But if they want to learn a skill, like for example, one of the businesses that we built or the real estate investments that we've had, we will help them learn that, and they can come work in the family business to learn that, and then we will help them, learn how to go buy it on their own. But they're not inheriting any of the family business. They're not inheriting any of the family investments. Um, and that was an interesting concept. It was kind of like common knowledge that, hey, you get some of the benefits today, but you know hey, me and mom, we're gonna exhaust we're going to exhaust this. And so if you want to build it for yourself, we will absolutely help you build it for yourself, but we're not just going to give it to you. And I thought that was a very interesting approach. So it was more an invitation that we will help you learn how to earn it, but you won't just receive it. Um, and really, it was like, it was like the idea that the parents were going to exhaust their investments throughout their life, right? So, hey, especially up to a certain age, after a certain age, we're going to, in essence, kind of cut you off. But if you ever want to be involved, the door is wide open for that. But you're basically not going to be a trust fund baby, and you're not going to have this, big lofty inheritance coming. And so I think they even had it to where if they did not exhaust it during their life, there would be an inherit there'd be charities inheriting it. Interesting concept, right? Definitely not a generational wealth type of concept. But let me know your thoughts on this. Should you leave your kids real estate? Um, or your heirs, right? I feel like that might be more appropriate. What are your thoughts on stuff like that? I think for me, I haven't started having children yet. It's something that I've barely begun to formulate my thoughts on. Even though I don't have children yet, I still have my estate planning all set up because I want to make sure that my loved ones, and my assets and my partnerships are all properly set up. So those are just some thoughts. Make sure you guys build some thoughts around this. I'm going to go ahead, if you're on YouTube, at the end of this video, I'm going to tag a video that I did with attorney Mary Hart, and it's called Your Ultimate Love Letters, a podcast I did with her in the very beginning when I started this podcast last year. Fantastic conversation where she calls estate planning your ultimate love letter to your family. We had a really good conversation around estate planning. So I'm going to go ahead. If you're listening to this on Spotify or something like that, go back and look for the Mary Hart episode called The Ultimate Love Letter. And I hope you guys enjoy this. Thanks for tuning in. It's another day, another video.